In the dark, beneath the biggest party in the world, with a ghost's warning in their ears. Did you think I was kidding when I said this story was insane? We've had a hijacked awards show, a secret acting cult, a golden razor blade, and a blackmail archive that holds Hollywood by the throat. And that was just the appetizer. A lot of you in the comments for part 1 were guessing who whispered that word. Most of you said Sleepless. A few of you had some wilder theories. Keep guessing. But I'll tell you this much. The truth is more tragic than you can imagine. If you're just joining us, go back and watch part 1. For the rest of you, you know the drill. If you want to see this madness brought to life, fully animated with all the grit and glamour, let me know in the comments. Your demand is what makes these things happen. This is the story of Veronica Lane and Nova Quinn, 2 women who tried to outrun their past, only to find it waiting for them in the basement. Welcome to part 2, The Ghost in the Machine. The music swells, then cuts abruptly, plunging us back into the silence of the archive, immediately following the whispered word. ACT-6, the echo chamber. The word run hung in the absolute darkness, not as a suggestion, but as a physical command. For a split second, Veronica and Nova were no longer Hollywood royalty. They were Abby and Chloe again, 2 terrified girls lost in a forest, hearing the snap of a twig behind them. Instinct took over. They scrambled backward away from the voice, their hands scraping against the cold metal of the server racks. Was it a trap, Silas toying with them before the final blow, or was it a warning? Before they could decide, a sound buzzed through the dark. A low electric hum followed by a flicker. A single bare bulb, suspended from a long cord in the center of the room, sputtered to life. It cast a sickly yellow glow, throwing long, distorted shadows that danced like specters. And in the corner where the voice had come from, the light revealed a figure. It wasn't Silas. The man was gaunt, his frame swallowed by a threadbare, oversized janitor's uniform. His hair was thin and pale, his face a roadmap of sleepless nights and quiet desperation. He looked like a man who had been erased, his features smudged by time and obscurity. But his eyes were fiercely, unnervingly alive. They were fixed on the computer terminal, which was now displaying a terrifying message in stark red letters. Archive purge sequence initiated, T-10. You shouldn't have plugged that in, the man said, his voice a dry rasp, the same voice that had whispered to them. He pushed himself off the wall, moving with a weary grace. The heart isn't a key, it's a virus, a poison pill. Silas designed it as a failsafe. If one of his assets ever got their hands on it and tried to access the system, it would trigger a total wipe. Veronica stared at him. There was something horribly familiar about his face, a ghost of a memory from long ago industry magazines. Who are you? The man offered a sad, brittle smile. I'm the one who never collected his award. He gestured vaguely at the shelves. Julian Croft, Best Director 1999, or I was for about 6 hours. The name hit Veronica like a forgotten headline. Julian Croft, the wunderkind director. His debut film was a masterpiece. He was the talk of the town, the next big thing. And then, a week after his Aurelius win, he vanished. The official story was a breakdown, a retreat from the pressures of fame. Silas was my first real experiment in this town, Julian explained, his eyes distant. He found me, molded me, funded my film. He made me a star, but I made a mistake. On stage, I thanked my wife. I dedicated the award to her. I went off script. He let out a hollow laugh. Silas doesn't allow ad-libs. The next day, my wife was served with fabricated divorce papers. My studio funding was pulled. A story about my drug-fueled on-set rampages was leaked to every tabloid. Within a week, I was a pariah. I was nothing. He had hidden, living in the forgotten service tunnels and back rooms of the Orpheum, a building he knew intimately from his days as a film-obsessed usher. For 20 years, he had been the ghost in Silas's machine, watching, learning the network, occasionally causing tiny glitches. A lost file, a misdirected payment, small acts of sabotage. I'm the one who swapped the envelopes tonight, Julian confessed, looking at Nova. I've been trying to create enough chaos to expose him for years. I thought, if I put a real, uncontrollable talent on that stage, someone he didn't expect, it might just break the system. I didn't know you were one of his, and I never imagined you'd have a heart drive. An alarm, soft at first, then rising in pitch, began to pulse through the room. T-80. He knows you're here, Julian said, his voice hardening with urgency. The virus is wiping the central server, but it's also triangulating the location of the breach. Us. He pointed to a panel on the wall where a green light was now flashing red. When that countdown hits 0, the halon gas system will flood this room. It will sterilize the archive, and us with it. ACT-7, the digital ghost. 8 minutes, it wasn't a timeline, it was a death sentence. The reality of their situation crashed down on them, trapped in a tomb of secrets with a ghost and a ticking clock. The file, Veronica gasped, scrambling back to the computer. My file. I have to see it. The screen was a mess of cascading, corrupting data. The video player window was still open, but the image was frozen on that horrifying, inexplicable frame. A younger Veronica standing beside a hospital bed holding an unconscious Nova. The progress bar for the asset list download was stuck at 17%. There's no time to save everything, Julian said, his hands flying across a secondary keyboard on the desk, trying to bypass the lockdown protocols. The purge is eating the data from the inside out. You have to choose what's most important. The list, the names of his puppets, or one personal file. You can't have both. The old, buried dynamic between Abby and Chloe flared to life. The list, Nova said instantly, her voice firm. We need the list. It's the only leverage we have, the only way to burn him down. It was the practical, scorched earth logic of Chloe, the survivor. No, Veronica shot back, her eyes glued to the screen, to the secret that had defined her entire life. This is the answer. This is the reason for everything. I need to know why. It was the cry of Abby, the girl who always believed there was a reason for the pain, if only she could find it. Why you lost, who cares? Nova yelled, the stress fracturing her composure. We're about to lose our lives. You're still the same, always chasing validation, needing someone else's story to make sense of your own. And you're still ready to light the match without even looking at what you're burning, Veronica retorted, her voice trembling with 20 years of repressed resentment. This isn't just about me. Look at the screen. You're in it too. Don't you want to know what he did to us? T-50. The alarm was louder now, a frantic heartbeat counting down their final moments. Julian slammed his fist on the desk. Both of you shut up. Arguing is what he wants. It's how he always controlled you. He pointed to a small, auxiliary port on the side of the server tower. There's a backup data stream. It's slower, but it's isolated from the main purge. I can try to pull one file while the other download continues. It might not work. He looked from Veronica to Nova. Decide. No. Veronica looked at the frozen image, at the face of the girl she had once considered a sister, lying broken and helpless. The anger in her own heart subsided, replaced by a cold, familiar ache. She nodded. Try to save the list. Just see if you can open the video file. Let me see it, just once. Nova watched her, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. The fire of her anger cooled, leaving only the ashes of a shared, painful history. Julian's fingers became a blur. I'm rerouting, trying to isolate the video player's cache. It's fighting me. The main screen flashed. Download failed. Asset list CORRUPTED. The partial file was all they would get. But on the smaller secondary monitor, the video player flickered. The frozen image trembled, and then it began to play. It wasn't a video of an audition. It was raw, grainy security footage from a private hospital room. There was no sound. A younger Veronica, looking terrified and lost, stood by the window. The camera's timestamp read, February 14th, 2005, the week of her very first Aurelius nomination. In the bed, Chloe lay still as stone, a tangle of tubes and wires connecting her to a symphony of beeping machines. Her life was hanging by a thread, the footage cut, a new scene, a sterile meeting room. Veronica was sitting at a table. Across from her, looking younger but no less predatory, was Silas. He slid a piece of paper across the table, a contract. He spoke, and though there was no audio, his expression was clear. It was a non-negotiable offer. Veronica stared at the contract, then looked towards the camera, as if seeing the ghost of her future, and a single tear traced a path down her cheek. She picked up a pen and signed. The video cut one last time, back to the hospital. A doctor was talking to Veronica, smiling. On the bed, Chloe's eyes were open. The screen went black. ACT 8, the price of a soul. The silence in the archive was heavier than the darkness had been. The beeping of the countdown T-30 was the only sound. Nova stood rigid, her mind struggling to process the silent film of her own forgotten history. What was that? I don't remember being that sick. Veronica didn't look at her. She stared at the blank screen, her face a mask of profound, soul-deep exhaustion. "We made it to LA after we escaped," she began, her voice hollow, each word an effort. "We had nothing. We were living in a single room in a motel that smelled of bleach and regret. You started getting tired. Then the bruises started appearing, the fevers." She took a shaky breath. It was a rare blood disorder. The doctor said it was aggressive, a side effect of severe malnutrition and stress from our time at the Chrysalis. The treatment was new, experimental, and it cost more money than I could ever imagine. Nova's face was pale in the sickly yellow light. The memory was a ghost limb, an ache where a trauma should be. "I tried everything," Veronica continued, her voice cracking. "I begged. I was about to start selling myself. I was desperate, and when you're that desperate, you don't call God. You call the devil." She finally turned to face Nova, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. "I called him. I called Silas. I knew he had money, connections. I begged him to save you." He agreed. "On one condition." The terrible truth settled in the space between them, heavier than any golden statue. "He paid for everything," Veronica whispered. "The best doctors, the private room. He saved your life, and in return, I belonged to him. I had to become Veronica Lane, his perfect creation. I had to enter the industry and play the part he wrote for me, the part of the brilliant, tragic artist who is always, always the runner-up. My career wasn't a failure, Nova. It was a cage, a gilded cage I walked into to keep you alive. My 12 losses, that was the price. He couldn't let me win because winning meant power. Winning meant freedom. Winning meant I might be able to pay him back. He didn't want my money. He wanted my soul." The revelation struck Nova with the force of a physical blow. Her entire identity, the brash, indie firebrand who railed against the system, was a fraud. Her rebellion was a luxury paid for by Veronica's servitude. The anger she'd felt just moments before curdled into a sickening wave of shame and disbelief. All these years, she'd seen Veronica's grace as weakness, her ambition as a betrayal of their past. But it was the opposite. It was a sacrifice. T-10. The final minute, the alarm shrieked, a continuous, deafening wail. "We have to go," Julian yelled, pulling a rusted grate off a ventilation shaft in the floor. "This way. It leads to the roof." As he spoke, a loud clang echoed from the top of the metal staircase they had descended. A heavy-duty flashlight beam cut through the gloom, pinning them in its glare. A figure stood there, blocking their only other escape. They were wearing a caterer's uniform, their face obscured by the sleek, metallic fox mask. "You weren't supposed to see this," the figure said, their voice electronically distorted by the mask. "Silas sent you," Nova snarled, stepping in front of Veronica, her protective instincts ignited. The figure let out a low chuckle. "Silas doesn't get his hands dirty." He reached up and pulled off the mask. It was Carl, the stage manager they had found unconscious in the restroom. His eyes were not the eyes of a victim. They were the cold, clear eyes of a zealot. "He wasn't a victim," Julian breathed. "He's an enforcer." Carl's gaze fell on Veronica, filled with a strange mix of pity and contempt. "All you had to do was play your part. He gave you a beautiful life. He gave her life," he said, nodding at Nova. "Silas is an artist, and this industry is his canvas. He is bringing order to the chaos, purity to the filth. You were part of that beautiful design. Now you're just a loose thread." He stepped down into the room, and the light glinted off the object in his hand. The golden razor, ACT-9 fire and water. Data purge imminent. Halon gas deployment in 30 seconds. The automated voice was calm, clinical, announcing their execution. Carl advanced slowly, the golden razor held delicately in his fingers. He was a true believer, another of Silas's lost souls reshaped into a weapon. "He gives us purpose," Carl said, his voice ringing with conviction. "He takes the broken like me, like you, and makes us part of something timeless. You threw that away." There was no time for a fight, no time for anything. Julian, with the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose, made his move. He let out a guttural yell and launched himself at Carl, a blur of gray uniform and raw fury. The two men crashed into a server rack, a shower of sparks erupting as the metal buckled. The grate. "Go," Julian screamed, grappling with the much stronger enforcer. "The secondary system, it's water. It'll destroy the hard evidence." 10, 9, 8. Veronica was frozen, caught between flight and a loyalty she didn't know she still possessed. This man, this ghost, had tried to save them. Nova acted. The fighter, Chloe, took over. She grabbed one of the heavy, black ledgers from the shelves, a book of secrets, and with a primal scream, she swung it like a bat into the side of Carl's head. He staggered, stunned, his grip on Julian loosening. 5, 4, 3. "Nova, come on," Veronica yelled, pulling her toward the open grate. A deep, deafening hiss filled the room as the halon gas began to pour from vents in the ceiling. It was thick, white, and suffocating. They could hear Julian and Carl coughing, their struggle becoming more desperate. Then a new sound, the roar of water. A deluge burst from pipes overhead, a failsafe to destroy the physical drives the gas couldn't. The archive was becoming a tomb of churning water and poison air. Veronica and Nova scrambled into the ventilation shaft, pulling themselves up a rusted, slimy service ladder. Below them, the water rose with terrifying speed, submerging the blinking lights, the secrets, and the fighting men. The last thing they saw was Julian giving Carl one final, desperate shove under the churning surface before they were both swallowed by the flood. They climbed, gasping for air, their muscles screaming, the sound of the deluge fading beneath them. Finally, Veronica's hand hit a metal plate. She pushed. It gave way with a groan of rusted hinges. They spilled out, coughing and soaked, onto the flat, tar-papered roof of the Grand Orpheum Theater. The night air was cold, smelling of rain and asphalt. Below them, the world was a kaleidoscope of flashing red and blue lights. The lockdown was over. The gala's panicked attendees were streaming out, swarmed by news vans and police cars. They were free. They had the golden heart drive, now just a useless piece of metal. They had a corrupted, partial list of names. And they had the truth, a truth more poisonous than any gas. As they stood there, shivering in their ruined finery, a massive digital billboard on a skyscraper across the street, which had been showing news coverage of the gala chaos, flickered. The news feed vanished, replaced by a crystal-clear live image. It was a close-up of a man in a minimalist, high-tech control room, like a Bond villain's lair. He was older, his face lined but his eyes sharp and merciless. It was Sila's. He wasn't a ghost, he wasn't a memory. He was real and he was watching them. ACT-10 checkmate. His image dominated the skyline, a digital god looking down upon the city he controlled. He wasn't speaking to the news anchors or the police. His gaze through the camera was fixed directly on the two women standing on the roof. He smiled, a cold, unfailing expression of absolute victory. His voice, amplified by the building's speaker system, boomed across the rain-slicked plaza, silencing the sirens and the shouts. "A lovely performance, ladies, truly," Silas's voice echoed, a sound of smooth steel. Raw, emotional. A bit melodramatic at the end, but you always did have a flair for that, Abby. But you seem to have forgotten the first rule of the chrysalis. He reached off camera and picked up a small, rusted object. An old tin box caked with dirt, the box they had buried in the forest 20 years ago, the grave of their former selves. The old you never truly dies. On the massive screen, he opened the box. He pulled out two laminated, dog-eared ID cards and held them up to the camera. One was a school ID for a shy, brown-haired girl named Abigail Miller. The other was a foster system card for a defiant, dark-eyed girl named Chloe Perez. Their faces, their real names. He wasn't just threatening to expose a past secret. In a world built on image and brand, he was threatening to erase Veronica Lane and Nova Quinn entirely. To reduce them back to the broken girls they had paid such a high price to escape. Silas set the tin box down on the console in front of him, a king positioning his final chess piece. "The game isn't over," his voice boomed, a final, chilling promise. "It's just entered the final act. Welcome home, girls." The screen cut to black. On the roof, in the cold Lowe's Angel's rain, Veronica and Nova could only stare at the empty billboard, the echo of his words ringing in their ears. They hadn't escaped the prison. They had just been moved from the dungeon to a much larger, much more terrifying arena with the whole world watching. The sirens wailed below, a symphony for the damned.